Let's start now. The Fall into Darkness, Act 1. The Descent into the Abyss, Scene 1. The Silence and the Stench. The silence of the night was not merely the absence of sound. It was a suffocating, ancient dread that seemed to weigh down the very air. Deep within the hidden Ubuyashiki estate, the atmosphere had turned stagnant. Usually, the wind would whisper through the wisteria trees, but tonight they stood like frozen skeletons. Every insect had gone silent. Every bird had fled. It was a predatory stillness, the kind that exists only when the natural world realizes that a god of death is approaching. On the wooden porch, Kagaya Ubuyashiki sat perfectly still despite his body crumbling from within. The purple curse of his lineage had claimed his sight and mapped its way across his forehead like the rotting roots of a dead tree. He looked less like a man and more like a living ghost, held together by nothing but sheer willpower. Beside him sat his wife, Ame, and their two young daughters, Hinaki and Michika. Silent, calm, and prepared for the catastrophe to come. Then, the atmosphere fractured. The sweet fragrance of peach blossoms was suddenly incinerated, replaced by a cold, metallic stench that smelled of ancient blood and stagnant iron. Slow, rhythmic footsteps began to crunch against the gravel path. Each step was deliberate, heavy with an arrogant weight that seemed to crush the very earth. Muzan Kibutsuji stepped into the pale moonlight. He did not look like a monster. He looked like an immaculate king in a tailored suit, but his eyes, the color of fresh arterial blood, glowed with 1,000 years of pure, unadulterated malice. "So, you are still breathing, Kagaya," Muzan spoke. His voice was like velvet dipped in poison, smooth, yet cuttingly lethal. He looked at Kagaya as if he were a rotting carcass. I expected a grand fortress, a legion of Hashira. Instead, I find a pathetic, dying man who smells of the grave. Is this the master who has been a thorn in my side for 10 centuries? Scene 2, the curse of centuries. Kagaya closed his sightless eyes, but he could hear the screams of 1,000 years of ancestors. "Muzan," he whispered, his voice holding a haunting peace. "Ever since you chose to abandon your humanity and drink that demon's blood, a black shadow fell upon our family. Our children died as soon as they were born. No one in our line lived past the age of 30. We have spent centuries performing penance for your sins, just so that one day your filthy soul would be wiped from this world. We accepted this illness as our fate, solely to destroy you." Muzan took a step forward, a cold, mocking smile on his face. "Your family was weak, Kagaya. You saw death as a punishment. I saw it as a disease to be cured. I wish to be the sun that never sets. And you are merely about to become a pile of ash." Scene 3, the eternal human will. Kagaya smiled, a smile that only fueled Muzan's rage. "You still don't understand, Muzan. You think I am the heart of this organization? No. The Demon Slayer Corps is not built on a single man. It is a bond, a resolve forged through centuries of blood and tears. You can kill me. You can burn this house, but you can never kill the will that stands against evil. As long as even one person remembers the pain you have caused, this fire will never be extinguished. My death is not the end, Muzan. It is the spark that will turn your world into a funeral pyre." Scene 4, the innocent sacrifice. Hanaki and Michika remained motionless. They knew their time had come. There was no fear in their eyes, only pride for their father. Muzan reached out his hand to crush Kagaya's throat, but in that exact microsecond, the world was erased by a blinding white light. Boom! Kagaya had not just rigged the house, he had loaded the entire estate with high-grade explosives and Tamayo's anti-demon wisteria medicine. A cataclysmic explosion erupted, shaking the very foundations of the mountains. Muzan's flesh began to vaporize instantly. His skin bubbled, his muscles tore, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Demon King felt the searing heat of mortality. He screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the flames. Through the swirling ash, 5 silhouettes emerged. Giyu, Gyomei, Tsunemi, Mitsuri, and Oben AI. Their eyes held nothing but death. Tanjiro charged from behind, his lungs burning with the Hinokami Kagura. Muzan! You will not escape tonight. Scene 5. The Shattered Gravity. Muzan's body struggled to regenerate, slowed down by the medicine. He tried to strike back, but then, pluck. The chilling note of Nakaim's Baiwa fractured the air. Tanjiro felt the ground vanish. Gravity was no longer a law. It was a memory. He was falling through a void where walls rotated and staircases spiraled into a bottomless darkness. This was the Infinity Castle, a labyrinth where every door led to a new death. Looking up, he saw the Hashira being separated, swallowed by the mechanical roar of the fortress. Tanjiro slammed onto a wooden walkway, surrounded by darkness and the growls of 1,000 demons. He was alone, but miles away. In a chamber of frozen lotuses, Shinobu Kocho was drawing her blade. She had found the sense she had waited a lifetime for. The war had truly begun. Act 2. The Butterfly's Last Dance. Scene 1. The Descent into the Frozen Hell. The Infinity Castle was not merely a structure. It was a living, shifting organism of mahogany and madness. As the Master's estate vanished into a pillar of white fire, the Demon Slayers were pulled into a void where gravity was a forgotten law. Shinobu Kocho, the insect Hashira, felt the rush of cold air against her face as she tumbled through a maze of rotating sliding doors and spiraling staircases. She adjusted her weight in midair, her butterfly-patterned haori fluttering like the wings of a dying moth. She landed. There was no sound of wood hitting wood. Instead, there was a sharp, crystalline crunch. Shinobu looked down to find her sandals pressing into a layer of frost that coated a vast, circular floor. She was in a sanctuary of ice. Enormous frozen lotus flowers, carved with impossible detail, rose from the ground like jagged teeth. The air here didn't just chill the skin. It felt like tiny needles of ice were being inhaled with every breath, pricking the inner lining of her lungs. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic sound of water dripping, or perhaps it was blood. Scene 2, the Mirror of No Soul. In the center of this frozen purgatory, sitting atop a heap of discarded silk kimonos and the pale remains of young women, was a figure of terrifying beauty. He had silver hair that seemed to catch the ghostly light of the castle, stained at the top with a splash of deep crimson, as if someone had poured a cup of wine over his head. His eyes, rainbow-colored and shimmering with a kaleidoscopic intensity, bore the mark of Upper Moon 2. Doma, the leader of the Eternal Faith cult, looked at Shinobu and smiled. It was a perfect smile. Bright, warm, and utterly hollow. Doma was born a void. He had never felt a single spark of joy, sadness, or anger in his entire existence. To him, the world was a boring stage, and he was the only actor who knew the play was a lie. "Oh, a guest!" Doma chirped, his voice as light as a summer breeze. "And a hashra, no less. You look so delicate, so full of sorrow. Are you here to seek salvation? My paradise is always open to those who suffer." Scene 3. The Poisoner's Agony. Shinobu didn't respond to his taunts. Instead, her mind drifted back to the secret laboratory of the Butterfly Mansion for 12 months. 365 days of silent torture. She had prepared for this moment. She remembered the first time she drank the concentrated wisteria solution. It felt like liquid fire sliding down her throat, searing her esophagus. She remembered the nights she spent shivering under layers of blankets, her body rejecting the toxin, her internal organs pulsing with a dull, constant ache. She had calculated the dosage with surgical precision. To kill an upper moon, she couldn't just use a coated blade. She had to become the poison herself. Her blood, her bone marrow, even the tips of her fingernails were now saturated with 37 kilograms of lethal wisteria extract. Every heartbeat she felt today was a reminder of the slow suicide she had committed to ensure this monster's end. She was a living coffin, waiting for its occupant. Scene 4. The Ghost of the Flower Hashira. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Shinobu's voice was a low, dangerous vibration. She reached up and touched the butterfly hairpin that held her hair in place. The same one her sister, Kanai, had worn. A flashback flickered. A snowy night, the smell of iron, and Kanai lying in the mud, her lungs crushed. Kanai had begged Shinobu to leave the Demon Slayer Corps to live a normal life as a girl. But the sight of her sister's fading smile had burned a hole in Shinobu's soul that only revenge could fill. "Years ago, you murdered the Flower Hashira," Shinobu continued, her eyes narrowing. "She was my sister. And tonight, I am the ghost she left behind to drag you down." Doma tapped his golden fans against his chin, a look of mock curiosity on his face. "Flower Hashira? The one who used the breath of flowers. She was so kind, so gentle. She even felt pity for me as I was eating her. Can you imagine? What a beautiful, foolish soul. She was quite delicious, you know. Don't worry, little butterfly. I'll let you be with her again. Inside me, all pain disappears." Scene 5. A Dance of Desperation. Insect breathing, butterfly dance, caprice. Shinobu moved with a speed that defied the freezing atmosphere. She was no longer a human. She was a streak of purple light. She zigzagged across the ice lotuses, her feet barely touching the frost. Doma raised his fans, but Shinobu was faster. She lunged midair, spinning like a top, and drove her stinger-like blade directly into Doma's eye. The poison hissed as it entered his brain. Doma stumbled back, his face contorting as the purple veins of the wisteria toxin spiderwebbed across his skin. For a moment, the silence of the chamber was broken by his labored breathing. But then, his body adjusted. His advanced demonic physiology deconstructed the poison molecule by molecule. He stood up, his eye regenerating in a sickening squelch of flesh. "Magnificent," Doma laughed, his voice echoing. "The poison is complex, but it's too small a dose. You're too small, Shinobu-chan. You don't have the lungs or the arms to cut my head off. It's so sad. All that effort for nothing." He swung his fans. Blood demon art, frozen clouds. A mist of pulverized ice filled the room. Shinobu tried to breathe, but the ice crystals entered her throat, tearing her lungs. She began to cough up blood, her movements slowing as the cold began to shut down her nervous system. Scene 6. The final dissolution. Shinobu was broken. Her ribs were crushed, her collarbone shattered by a strike from Doma's fan. She lay on the ice, looking up at the ceiling of the Infinity Castle. Doma knelt beside her, his expression filled with a terrifying, artificial tenderness. He picked her up, cradling her like a child. There, it's over now. You did your best. Now, come and find your sister. He began to absorb her. Shinobu felt her legs dissolving into his torso, her arms merging with his chest. It was a slow, agonizing death. But as her vision faded to black, she saw Kanao Suyuri, her student. Hidden behind a pillar, tears streaming down her face. Shinobu didn't scream. She didn't cry. She used her final ounce of strength to give Kanao a signal, a silent command to wait. Doma let out a satisfied sigh as the last of the insect Hashira vanished into his body. He felt a surge of energy, a warmth he hadn't felt in centuries. She was quite a fighter, he whispered, wiping a smear of blood from his chin. He stood up, ready to find his next victim. But then his heart skipped a beat. A searing, white-hot pain erupted in his stomach. His skin began to bubble. His eyes began to melt out of their sockets. The 37 kilograms of poison were finally waking up. Doma collapsed to his knees, his body literally liquefying from the inside out. The butterfly had been eaten, but she had turned the predator into her own grave. Far across the castle, the sound of rolling thunder began to shake the walls. Zenitsu Agatsuma had arrived, and his blade was already crackling with the fury of 1,000 storms. Act 3. The Thunder of Vengeance. Scene 1. The Corridor of Storms. Deep within the shifting bowels of the Infinity Castle, the air was heavy with the smell of ozone and burnt wood. There was no sound of screaming, no sound of running. Only the sharp, rhythmic clack of a single pair of wooden sandals. Zenitsu Agatsuma walked down a long, narrow hallway lined with sliding paper doors that led into an endless void. Usually, Zenitsu would be crying, his legs shaking with a cowardice that defined his life. But today, his eyes were wide open. They weren't filled with fear. They were cold, golden pools of focused intent. He didn't look like the boy who hid behind Tanjiro. He looked like a storm cloud that had finally reached its breaking point. His hand was resting firmly on the hilt of his Nichiren blade, the lightning bolt pattern on the steel vibrating with a low, menacing hum. Scene 2, the betrayal of the successor. A sudden, jagged streak of black lightning tore through the ceiling, shattering the wooden beams above. A figure descended, landing with a heavy thud on a floating platform. It was Kigaku, Zenitsu's senior disciple, the man who was supposed to be the next Thunder Hashira. But he was no longer human. His skin was pale, his eyes marked with the kanji for Upper Moon 6, and his black Nichiren blade was wreathed in a sickening, dark electricity. Well, if it isn't the little crybaby, Kagaku sneered, his voice dripping with an arrogance that echoed off the shifting walls. You've grown a bit of a backbone, haven't you? But look at me, Zenitsu. I've reached heights you could only dream of. I've gained the power of a god while you're still playing soldier for a dying organization. I was always the better student. I was the one who deserved the title. Scene 3. The Weight of the Peaches. Zenitsu didn't flinch. Instead, his mind drifted back to the peach orchard on the mountain where they trained. He remembered Jigoro Kwajima, Gramps, the former Thunder Hashira who had taken them in when no one else would. Gramps had treated them like his own sons, sharing his peaches and his wisdom. Zenitsu remembered how Kaigaku would always look down on him, calling him a waste of space, because Zenitsu could only master the first form. But Gramps would always say, "Zenitsu, if you can only do one thing, hone it to perfection. Strike with the force of 1,000 suns." Zenitsu realized now that Kaigaku never understood the heart of thunder breathing. To Kaigaku, it was just a tool for ego. To Zenitsu, it was a debt of gratitude to the man who saved his life. Scene 4. The seppuku of the master. You killed him, Kaigaku. Zenitsu's voice was a low growl, more like a vibration of thunder than a human sound. When you chose to become a demon when you kneeled before Kokushibo and drank that filthy blood, you forced Gramps to commit seppuku. He had to disembowel himself, alone, without a second to end his pain, because his student, his legacy, had become a monster. Do you have any idea how much he suffered because of your cowardice? Kaigaku laughed, a cold, grating sound. That old man was a fool. He died for a dead tradition. If he couldn't handle the truth of my power, that's his problem. Why should I care about a weakling who lived in the past? I am the future. Scene 5. The 7th form. God of Flaming Thunder. The air in the room suddenly ionized. Zenitsu took a low stance, his center of gravity shifting. The ground beneath his feet began to crack, and yellow sparks began to jump between his hair and his clothes. Kaigaku, Zenitsu whispered, his hand tightening on the sword. You were right about one thing. I could only ever do the first form. But I wasn't just sitting around. I was creating something just for you. Kaigaku lunged, his black lightning tearing through the air in a chaotic web. Blood demon art. Distant thunder. The room was filled with the roar of dark electricity, blinding and lethal. But Zenitsu was no longer there. Thunder breathing. 7th form. Anoikazuchi no Kami. In a flash of golden light that was so bright it turned the entire room white, Zenitsu moved. He didn't just move. He became a dragon of pure electricity. The sound wasn't a crackle. It was a roar that shook the very core of the Infinity Castle. He bypassed Kaigaku's black lightning as if it were standing still. The air heated up to the temperature of a star, and a trail of flaming thunder followed Zenitsu's blade. Slash. Kaigaku's head was severed before he even realized Zenitsu had moved. The golden dragon of fire and lightning tore through his neck, sealing his fate. Scene 6. The final ascension. Kaigaku's body began to crumble into ash as he fell toward the bottomless pit of the castle. He was screaming in rage, unable to accept that the crybaby had surpassed him. But Zenitsu was also falling. His legs were shattered, his body burned from the intensity of his own technique. As Zenitsu drifted through the air, he saw a vision of Gramps in the clouds. The old man was crying, but he was also smiling. You did well, Zenitsu. You are my pride and joy. Zenitsu closed his eyes, a single tear falling as he whispered, I'm sorry I took so long, Gramps. Zenitsu was caught mid-air by Yushiro, who rushed to treat his wounds. The Upper Moon 6 was dead, but the victory felt heavy. Suddenly, the castle shook again. A presence far more terrifying than Doma or Kaigaku began to move. In a hall of six-eyed shadows, the strongest demon in history, Kokushibo, Upper Moon 1, was standing up. The final nightmare was beginning. Act 4. The Compass of Compassion. Scene 1. The Reunion of Hatred. The sound of sliding doors echoed like a death knell as Tanjiro Kamado and Giyu Tomioka landed in a vast, open courtyard within the Infinity Castle. The air was thick with a familiar, suffocating pressure, a weight of pure, unrefined malice that made the oxygen feel like lead. Standing in the center of the arena, his pink hair glowing under the spectral lights and his body covered in blue criminal tattoos, was Upper Moon 3, Akaza. Tanjiro's breath hitched. His mind immediately flashed back to the snowy night at the Muzan train. The smell of burning coal, the sound of Rengoku's final breath, and the mocking laugh of this monster as he fled into the sunrise. Akaza's eyes, etched with the rank of Upper 3, locked onto Tanjiro. He didn't look angry. He looked excited, like a predator finding a worthy toy. You, the boy from that night. Akaza's voice was a low, melodic purr. You've grown strong. You've survived. Kyojuro would be proud, but tonight, I will finish what I started. I will turn you into a masterpiece of blood and bone. Scene 2, the technique development. Compass needle. Akaza stomped his foot, and a massive blue snowflake pattern erupted on the ground beneath him. Blood demon art. Compass needle. This was his ultimate sensory ability. The technique that allowed him to sense the fighting spirit of his opponents. The more Giyu and Tanjiro wanted to kill him, the more accurately Akaza could predict their moves. Giyu Tomioka moved first, his water breathing creating a tide of lethal strikes. 11th form, dead calm. The room became a silent ocean as Giyu deflected Akaza's shockwaves with surgical precision, but Akaza was faster. He laughed as he traded blows with Giyu, his punches breaking the sound barrier. Beautiful! Such refined technique. Become a demon? Giyu, let's fight for eternity! Akaza's punches were like meteorites, cracking Giyu's ribs and sending shockwaves through the courtyard that shattered the surrounding pillars. Scene 3. The Transparent World. Tanjiro watched the fight, his mind racing. He realized that as long as he held onto his fighting spirit, he could never touch Akaza. He remembered his father, Tanjiro, who used to dance the Hinokami Kagura in the freezing snow for hours without getting tired. His father had a selfless state, a way of seeing the world where the muscles, blood flow, and bones of the opponent became transparent. Tanjiro closed his eyes and emptied his mind. He let go of his hatred for Rengoku's death. He let go of his desire to win. He entered the transparent world. Suddenly, Akaza's movements slowed down. Tanjiro could see the expansion of Akaza's lungs and the twitch of his muscles. To Akaza, Tanjiro had suddenly disappeared from his compass, becoming a ghost in the middle of the battlefield. Scene 4. The Ghost of Hakuji, the Backstory. As Tanjiro's blade neared Akaza's neck, a flood of memories, not Tanjiro's, but Akaza's, began to leak into the air. Before he was Akaza, he was Hakuji, a boy born in the slums who stole medicine to save his sick father. He was caught and tattooed as a criminal, but his spirit was never broken. After his father committed suicide to stop being a burden, Hakuji met Kizo, a kind dojo master who taught him the Soryu style of martial arts. Hakuji found a reason to live in Koyuki, Kizo's sickly daughter. He spent years nursing her back to health, falling in love with her under the fireworks of a summer festival. He promised to protect her forever, but fate was cruel. A rival dojo poisoned the well of Kizo's house, killing both Kizo and Koyuki while Hakuji was away. When Hakuji returned to find their cold, lifeless bodies, something inside him snapped. He murdered 67 members of the rival dojo with his bare hands, painting the walls red with their blood. In his grief, he met Muzan, who turned him into a demon, wiping his memories but leaving behind a subconscious obsession with becoming the strongest to protect what he had already lost. Scene 5. The Shattered Compass. Back in the present, Tanjiro's blade struck. In Okami Kagura, setting sun transformation, a wheel of fire tore through the air, severing Akaza's head completely. The head fell to the floor, but Akaza's body refused to die. His will to be strong was so powerful that his headless torso continued to fight Giyu, punching through the Hashira's shoulder. But then, a hand touched Akaza's shoulder. Not Tanjiro's, but the ghost of Koyuki. Hakuji. Please stop, she whispered. You've done enough. You don't have to fight anymore. Akaza looked at her through his spirit's eye and remembered everything. He remembered the fireworks, the medicine, and the man he used to be. He realized that the weaklings he hated so much were actually reflections of his own younger self who couldn't protect his family. Scene 6. The ultimate choice. Akaza smiled. A real human smile for the first time in centuries. He turned his own technique on himself, punching his own body with a devastating shockwave. He chose to die. He chose to go back to Kizo and Koyuki. As his body crumbled into ash, he looked at Tanjiro and gave a nod of respect. You won, Tanjiro Kamado. Tanjiro and Giyu collapsed on the floor, their bodies broken and bleeding. 2 upper moons were dead, but the cost was astronomical. The Infinity Castle let out a final haunting groan as the camera panned out, showing the entire fortress shifting once more. The screen fades to black as the voice of Muzan Kibutsuji echoes, "The night is still young, and the sun is far away." As the echoes of battle slowly faded, a strange calm settled over the Infinity Castle. For the first time, the air didn't feel suffocating. It felt lighter, as if the souls of the fallen had finally found peace. Tanjiro looked toward the distance, his eyes no longer filled with rage, but with quiet hope. The war was far from over, but tonight, humanity had taken a step forward. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a new dawn was waiting. And this is only the beginning. If this story touched your heart, then stay with us. The battle against Muzan is not over yet. A greater storm is coming, and the fate of humanity will be decided in the next chapter. So don't go anywhere. Keep watching, keep believing, and get ready for movie 2. The final war is about to begin.